Hello, everyone. Welcome to Dr. Jaspersoft Office Hours webinar. This is episode 25 in March 2022. First of all, let me apologize for the reschedule. This was supposed to happen yesterday, and due to some technical issues, we had to reschedule to today. So hopefully you got the notification and you were able to join today. So today we're going to talk about basically how to use this new, well, not new, but recent API language called GraphQL, which was released by Facebook in 2015. Basically how to use data coming from GraphQL server backend to in JasperReports Server, or in general in a Jaspersoft JasperReports report. So either through the server or Studio, and this is done. We're going to show how to do this via a component called AutoREST or Autonomous REST Connector, which is a JDBC driver that's available out of the box in our product, starting from 7.5. Before 7.5, there was a separate download, but now it's part of the product. So let's talk briefly about next session. Just as usual, it should happen if nothing goes wrong on the second Thursday of every month at 9 a.m. Pacific or 6 p.m. Central European time. So the next session is going to be on April 14th. Quick overview of what we're going to show. Basically, you start with a standard SQL query, either in a Studio report or through a domain in JasperReports Server, and that's going to go through the JDBC driver, the AutoREST driver that we mentioned, and then from there you can basically point that driver to either a GraphQL endpoint or either a standard JSON or even XML and CSV endpoints. In this session, we're going to focus on the GraphQL one, but obviously you still have the option of using a standard endpoint. We actually run a session. So we ran a session in September, last September, on the standard kind of setup and implementation for the normal endpoint. So as we mentioned, it's an open source data query manipulation language. You got this website with a lot of information. The interesting thing about this is that you can join multiple objects in a single request. So whereas normally with a standard endpoint, you could have, let's say, in our example, actually, we're going to show about a TV show called Rick and Morty. So we have an API for that. And basically, before that, you would have to, let's say, query an endpoint for the episodes of the show, and then another episodes for the characters, and then kind of join them together somehow. In this case, with we'll show that with one single query, GraphQL query, you can retrieve all the data together. And so that's quite useful. And typically, it's presented as a single post endpoint. So it's post request where you submit a query and you get the query back in JSON. This is, of course, it's something that needs to be implemented in the server, right? So you need a server-side implementation of the service and a schema set up in order to allow clients to make queries. As I mentioned before, we have the AutoREST connector, we call it ARC for short, 600. It comes pre-installed out of the box from JRS 750 and later, and also in Studio. If you want the detailed documentation, you can go to Progress, which is the original developer, and we redistribute and license their driver. You can join multiple REST endpoints in general, but as you'll see, it's kind of easier to do in GraphQL. In the end, once you set it up, you have just a standard SQL query. So you treat it as a normal database with some limitations in terms of what you can do in the queries. We'll see one of those. And as I said, we did a webinar, a general webinar on Arc last September. So please go and check that YouTube. It's a long link, but basically it's a Dr. Jaspersoft playlist in our channel, and you'll find the video there. Okay, so you might have the question, where should I join the data, right? You know, if you have multiple objects that you want to put together. I mean, ideally, if you have implemented the GraphQL service on your in your endpoint or in your server, then of course, you know, ideally you would join all the required objects together in one single query and get back all together. That's quite efficient. If it's in different endpoints that are separate and maybe they don't implement GraphQL, you can use them as separate endpoints, define them as separate endpoints in the REST config, and also use them that way. And then finally, once you have the individual objects presented as tables, then you can join them as well, of course in SQL, in the domain design or in Studio as a query. A couple of notes. So when you have HTTPS endpoints, you might require to add this property to the URL. This is I'm not gonna go and explain that there is a problem of compatibility. So if it just works, don't worry about it. But if you notice an error with SSL, you might need to add this particular property of Arc. And then the other property here that needs to be there, it's transaction mode equal ignore. That's actually not in the slide. I'm gonna fix that now. So basically, oops, excuse me. So that would be transaction mode equal ignore, and we'll see that in JRS anyway. This is done by automatically, but you might need to add it if you do it differently. So that's just an additional property, and that's it. So we can go straight to the demo. So let's. So first of all, I want to start from this page. So basically, this is the Rick and Morty API, as I mentioned. It's documented here. You can use it directly via REST or via GraphQL. And then if you go to the GraphQL Playground, as it's called, you have some sample queries, by the way, that they're shown here. You need to kind of understand the GraphQL language. There's an example here. I mean, there are many examples here, obviously in the GraphQL website and the documentation, but basically, if I run this query, it's an example. I get just one page, by default 20 rows of the episodes of the show, right? And then I'll show you that we can obviously run different, change a query. Typically, when you have one of these playground, you have a schema here that helps you, guides you through how to query basically. Okay, once you get a query that works, this query needs to be somehow converted for use, but I'll show you the final result for now. So let me show you another query, some other queries. So just to give you a couple of examples. So this is the first one I showed, simple episodes, page 1, and then get the ID and the name of the episodes. And then in this case, we're gonna add kind of a joint entity, which is characters. So any characters that it's in that episode, the particular episodes, and then we want to see the name and the species of that character. And then we can add filters. For example, we can filter on the episode name, like in this case, in the pilot episode, and this is the ones that we just run. So let me run this one, for example. So I can, okay, so I get still a list of episodes, but I also get a list of characters that are present in that episode. So and their species. So okay, so let's say we are happy with this query. Now, how do I create the REST configuration? First of all, let me show you the final result, and then I'll show you how we built to that. So this is an ad hoc view, and we have basically episode ID, episode name, character name, and then we group them by species. So alien, and in this case, alien and human, because I added a filter on the species. Want to clarify one of those limitations I talked about. The in syntax for the query is not available with the ARC. Therefore, if you need to have a list of multiple items, you need to basically do an OR, and this is the way you would do it in an ad hoc view. So I had two filters on the same field. One equals alien, and the other one equals human, and then I do an OR. So you need to open this custom filter expression here. So filter A or B, and then I get both. It's equivalent to an in, but it's a little bit more complicated. Okay, then so this ad hoc view is is built on a domain. So I'm going to show you the domain briefly. So once I loaded the data source, I will have this AutoREST schema, and I have two tables, one called characters and one called episodes. And then I will join them here through episode ID, an inner join. And then I simply add the join tree to data presentation. The only thing I did, like that I changed from this is I removed the query. There's a query field that you don't need to display to the user, so it's better to remove it. It's the actual query that needs to be sent to the GraphQL endpoint, but you don't have to worry about that. Just and the other thing I did is I changed these names, so the name field, so it's character name and episode name instead of name for both. So that's what I did. Then once I created the domain, I could create that ad hoc view. And the domain is built on the data source. So the data source, simply you go and create a new data source, JDBC driver, you pick this one, which is available out of the box, as I said, autonomous REST. Typically you want, not typically, in this case, we don't require authentication. So I just put none, and then I put the REST file or REST config file, in this case, this one. And they will be added here automatically. And then finally, the one I mentioned before, transaction mode equal ignore, you need this, otherwise things won't work. In this case, I don't have authentication, so username and password I don't need. Click test connection, it works, and save. In this case, I don't need to save. It's already saved. Okay, so this is basically the built, the final product built. Now, the important aspect here, obviously, is the config file, right? So this is it's called .rest file. This is the config file that defines my query and the endpoint, etc. So you see here the host name or the endpoint, and then there are the two. I mean the object defined, post, etc., etc. The post request, content type JSON, which is the default, the fields, etc., etc., and then the query. Okay, so this is where we pass that query, and I'll show you how to generate this. It's not that straightforward, but basically, so it's the same query that I showed you before here. this one, page one and characters, names, etc. But it's formatted in a single line. You can do this in multiple ways, but basically you convert new lines to this \n. So it's not that straightforward. That's why we're doing this this webinar, this demo. One way I do it, and in general I recommend testing before with Postman. So I would run Postman. There is an actual GraphQL type for the body. So you define the request as a post, the endpoint, and then you put the query here. And then once you go to the code snippet, which is up here on the right, it will show you, for example, for curl, the option, and it will give you that format there. And then you can use. You don't need these variables only up to here. And that's it. And you can test it here. It's a good idea to test it in Postman before, and that's it. So this is the final, the end result. Now, the syntax of the config file, it's a bit complex. So, I mean, I'll share this file as an example, and you can use that. But normally, we have an option to use a web UI to work on the configuration, and this is the web UI I'm talking about. So basically, you can define everything here. I'll show you the whole process, but this is the final result again, where you can test things basically for the AutoREST connector. Now, once you worked on this and you're happy with the result, so in this case, automatically Arc would generate 2 tables, and there's a query for both. But one is with the episodes and the other one is for the characters, and there's an episode ID, so you can join them together. And then you click download, and it will give you the config file, and that's it. It's relatively straightforward to do it here. So I'll show you this process. One note that's quite important is that this UI is currently not available with our version of the jar file that you get with the product. There's a simplified version there. I'll show you that briefly. So if I go to my lib folder, in this case, this is a 7.9 installation, but it's the same. You'll find this jar file. If you double click on that jar file, it will open this UI, right? So, and you can create a connection, you can set the authentication methods, etc. So that's very useful. But for the REST config file, it expects that you pass a file there. Now, so I'm gonna go and change here from JDBC, I go to Arc, and it gives me this simplified UI here, but it doesn't work very well, and it's kind of limited in terms of options. So I probably wouldn't recommend it to use it. So how did I get to this one? So this one, it's more rich. So this is part of the version 6.0.1 of the driver, which is not in our product yet. So unless you have it licensed separately yourself, you wouldn't have it out of the box. You can download from Progress the latest version as a trial if you just want to try it and use it with their license terms. And we do have in the roadmap to upgrade the version to 6.0.1. So once you have that, but I cannot tell you exactly what version of our product will contain this driver, the latest driver, hopefully soon, but I cannot make any promises, of course. If you're a customer and you want to ask an update about this, please log a support case and ask, and then we can get you an official answer to support and product management. But in any case, if you download the trial from Progress, you'll find this kind of file in the installation. This is kind of the path. Once installed, JDBC 60 lib, and then you have AutoREST.jar. So when you double click on that, you get this full UI that I showed you before. So now let's create this REST config file from scratch, which is kind of the main point here. So I'm gonna refresh this page. And what I'll see with Arc, actually, I'll show you if I could double click this. Well, I think it's already running, so that's why. But yeah, so it's still here. Okay, so that's what you see. It's gonna go to JDBC, and you can set all the connection options, etc. But then you can go to this page. What you do is there's a recipes already available for number of data sources, but in this case, for your own endpoint, you want to create the recipe, and let's say we call it RM Rick and Morty test, and then we put the URL or the endpoint, which I have here in this case, and as a base URL here. Click OK. We leave everything as it is for now. I can click test connect. It will pass, but it won't return anything. And then I go here to the API Explorer. So first thing, I have to change this to a post, and then I have to add something. So I'm gonna add the body of the request, which has the query that I showed before in that format. So that's the query, and I paste it here. And then sometimes this changes automatically because I put the body and it changes to post, but I can remove that and change it to post again. And then I go to table name. If I type any character, okay, still doesn't work. I think I need something else, which is the content type header. It's already there. Let's see. So this, okay. So it was the end slash there that was the problem. So if you type any character here, it's gonna propose a string here, and then after you got that, then you can click send. Otherwise, before you won't be able to. And then it will create this endpoint here on the left panel. With, in this case, automatically generated two tables. So one is the characters with name and species, and then they join to the episode ID. Well, in this case, it's called GraphQL. The names are automatically generated, so sometimes you have to go and change them yourself. So you can come here and say episodes and click save. And that's it. You're gonna have the two tables, characters and episodes. And again, with the characters have the episode ID for the join. So that's it. That's all you need. It will generate all the rest for you, the JSON root, etc. So you make sure you have content type JSON and the body, and that's all you need. And then click download, and it's gonna give you the REST config file. So if I click on that, that's the file generated. And then I'm gonna, in my case, I am running 8.0 inside Docker. It's a Docker instance, so I would do something like Docker CP of this file into a local folder. Now, this is a temporary solution. Obviously, you might want to use a volume in Docker or in Kubernetes, something like that. But it's just a matter of making the file locally available, in this case, to the home directory of the user in this folder. And then once it's there and it's visible or readable by Tomcat, then I'll be able to use it then in the data source, as I showed you before. So click edit, and this path here is where I place that file. And that's it. That's all you need. Now, the last thing I want to show you is Studio, right? So also 8.0 in this case, I have this report already made, quite simple. But let me run the preview again. So this report, actually, let me go back to the preview. So we have multiple pages. It's ordered by episode ID and character species. So we have It's filtered on alien and also this one, alien and human. And that's it. So if I go to design and then the query, this query here, you can write it yourself, or you can, if you have an out of view and you have enabled the SQL view, I can click here and I see the query that was generated. That's a good starting point for the query. Then you can put it in Studio and then change it, to whatever you need. What else? Okay, yeah, the data sort. In this case, is the data adapter here in Studio, and I defined it. It's pretty much the same as you would do in the server. Let's open it now. So you pick that driver that we said, autonomous REST, and then you have the URL here. And as I said, make sure you add transaction mode ignore, and the rest is pretty much the same. You can click test and test it there. And again, remember the crypto property in case it's you might need that for SSL endpoints. So that's it. It's pretty much all for today. Keep it short and sweet, and we'll let me go back to the slides. So we, as usual, these are a lot of resources for you. These are a new wiki page for Dr. Jaspersoft. You'll find all the links there for the webinar recordings, the slides, and any files. In this case, I'll share that file, the sample file there, and YouTube playlist that I mentioned. All the videos are there, all the webinars. If you have a question, you can use this, use the community and tag it with Dr. Jasper. And here's some additional links, the Rick and Morty API and the previous webinar. And then thank you very much. And you can also email us here if you have any questions related to the webinar. If they're just general questions about other things, please use the community forum. But for questions specific to these webinars, please send us an email here. So thank you very much. See you next.